Hello, I'm Nafisa Latic, and this is Across the Balkans. This week, we look into Slovenia's efforts to speed up Bosnia's EU membership to counter the rise of Russian influence in the region. Russia's attack on Ukraine has alarmed EU policymakers, altering their understanding of just how fragile the peace in Bosnia is. And back in March, NATO's Secretary General explicitly mentioned Bosnia, alongside Georgia and Moldova, as being at risk of conflict due to Russian interference. Slovenian President Borut Pahor expressed his commitment to Bosnia's EU accession process, saying he has urged the bloc to grant Bosnia candidate status by the end of the year. But will his calls have any impact on Brussels and its enlargement policies? Veljko Skenderia has this analysis for us from the Slovenian capital, Ljubljana.
It was only in June that the EU granted candidate status to Ukraine, Moldova and conditionally Georgia. But it since ignited a diplomatic offensive to speed up the integration of countries in the Western Balkans, primarily Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the initiative is led by two EU members from the former Yugoslavia, Croatia and more so Slovenia.
We think it's very important that we think out of the box. We speed up the process, we deliver candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina in the same framework as the EU recently delivered the candidate status to Ukraine and Georgia. I think it's important we don't leave any country and the region of the Western Balkans behind.
Slovenia's push comes from all levels, including the president himself. Borut Pahor warns that the conflict in Ukraine and the prospect of division looming over the EU has put the entire Western Balkans at risk, and that Bosnia and Herzegovina needs to be made a candidate by the end of this year.
It is also possible that the new bloc division might run across the middle of the Western Balkans, and this is a cause for concern. I find it hard to imagine this could unfold without security risk. In this respect, Bosnia and Herzegovina seems to be of key importance.
The Slovenian initiative seems to be succeeding, with Bosnia and Herzegovina once again a prime topic in diplomatic circles. And following an official visit by Slovenian Prime Minister Robert Golob, it's even swung the attitude of the once staunch opponent of the EU's expansion into the Western Balkans.
And it is clear, if we are lucid, that we have increasing external forces using this situation, tensions between communities, to destabilize not just Bosnia and Herzegovina, but the closest neighbors and the whole region. I think we cannot accept that. So, if the European perspective is part of the package with conditions to fix it, I'm totally ready to consider it.
Slovenia wants to convince the EU to speed up the process for Bosnia and Herzegovina, and without any conditions if possible, by also campaigning for the opening of accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania, as well as visa liberalization for Kosovo. It's signaling a real European perspective. Slovenia's support for Bosnia and Herzegovina in joining the EU isn't purely altruistic. Ljubljana officials reminded us that one of the bloodiest wars since World War II was fought right next door, and no one wants to see a repeat. Obtaining EU candidate status would also soften the growing nationalism among Bosnia's three main communities. But only a year ago, this support was very doubtful, which was evident in the case of an infamous non-paper. So what was actually mentioned in it? The so-called unofficial non-paper proposed the idea to diplomatic channels that the borders of ex-Yugoslavia countries be redrawn. And at the moment it was discovered and published by one of Slovenia's most vigilant investigative journalists, Primož Cirman, it caused an immediate storm.
This non-paper is an act to try a different approach, which is very dangerous. Why? Because if you change one border in former Yugoslavia, then you basically open Pandora's box. Then basically everyone would say, hey, why can you change this border and this border and this border? So basically you open door to chaos, and especially, of course, we know war.
Zirman believes the document was likely written in Belgrade and distributed by President Aleksandar Vučić, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, and also the Slovenian Prime Minister at the time, Janez Janša. And it had a little more to do than just the fragmentation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo.
So I think they wanted to seize the momentum between Trump and Biden and maybe check the pulse with the major European powers. I think that was that, and why were people from Slovenia distributing? To prove loyalty to Orban.
But these ideas all disappeared when the new Slovenian liberal government came to power. In contrast to the Eurosceptic Janša, it's pro-European and firmly believes that the key to peace in the Balkans is a stable Bosnia. Political analyst Žarko Puhovski says Slovenia's goal is to now also impose itself as a diplomatic leader in the region.
Oni hoće prije svega pokazati razliku u odnosu na Janšu. To je njima sad pitanje života i smrti da se oposebne u odnosu na Janšu. I s druge strane hoće pokazati da Slovenija ima nešto reći o Europskoj uniji što nije samo pitanje slovenskih interesa.
Puhovski also believes that Ljubljana is much more suitable to be the center of this diplomatic offensive than Zagreb, which cannot help but be biased considering one of the three constitutive nations in Bosnia and Herzegovina are Croats. Officially, the Croatian government supports the speedy candidacy for Bosnia and Herzegovina, but the recent message from Zagreb sounds more like a condition. It says Croatia primarily advocates for a stable Bosnia and that the elections on October 2nd are expected to be democratic and fair. The key reforms on the table are constitutional and electoral laws, which are the major stumbling block. The Croatian political elite believes that the position of Croats in Bosnia is unequal compared to the Serbs and Bosniaks, which is most noticeable in the electoral law that enables Croats to be outvoted. And for Zagreb, the only way forward is for the High Representative Christian Schmidt to intervene.
As a friend of Bosnia and Herzegovina, I call upon him to use his powers to ensure legitimate representation and equality of Bosnian Croats in the country's institutions following the 2nd October general election. As the least numerous among the constituent peoples, the Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina demand no favors, only equality.
It remains to be seen how strong Croatia's support will be and whether it will depend on strengthening the position of the Bosnian Croats. Sociologist Nikola Petrovic, who leads a multidisciplinary project, Integration and Disintegration of the EU, also warns of another internal problem, the worsening of conflicts with Bosnia society itself.
Taj proces proširenja će morati uzeti u obzir to da su mnoga balkanska društva podijeljena oko pripadanja zapadu ili istoku, a približavanje Europskoj uniji može zaoštriti odnose između grupa koje se vide na različiti način svoj identitet unutar Europe i šireg susjedstva.
But Bosnia and Herzegovina faces various other obstacles. It still needs to fulfill a number of criteria and implement reforms before it becomes an EU member. And considering the overall geopolitical situation, it's perhaps reasonable to ask whether the Union itself will disintegrate by then.
To je jedno od ključnih pitanja. Predstojeća potencijalna, čini se prilično izlična ekonomska kriza će sigurno naštetiti koheziji unutar Europske unije, tako da je teško bilo šta predviđati, ali činjenica je da su pred Europskom unijom izazovna vremena, a pred Bosnom i Hercegovinom dug put prema ulasku u Europsku uniju.
But that path at least now seems a little clearer, and Bosnia and Herzegovina is no longer forgotten by world's political elites, both in Brussels and Washington. They are now sure to closely monitor the country on October 2nd, and just how smooth the elections are may end up determining whether its EU bid can avoid a rockier road ahead. Veljko Skanderija, TRT World, Ljubljana, Slovenia, and Zagreb, Croatia.
Let's cross to Ljubljana now and speak to Zlatko Sabic. He's a professor of international relations at the University of Ljubljana. Great to have you with us, Zlatko. Now, how successful is Slovenia's initiative to speed up Bosnia's EU membership, and how are the diplomatic circles in Brussels reacting to this?
Well, I think that Slovenia's initiative is actually up and running pretty well. Obviously, the way I understand is that the support is growing. A lot, though, depends on the elections in Bosnia and Herzegovina. If these elections are going well and if there is a new government, I think we can be quite optimistic that there will be growing support, perhaps even towards the giving candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina at the December meeting.
And what kind of role does Slovenia want to play in the region at the moment? And how influential an EU member Slovenia actually is at the moment?
I think that Slovenia does want to play a role in the Balkans. It has been playing a role in the Balkans for obvious reasons. This is, in a way, its own backyard. It's very interested in having a stability there, also for economic reasons. As you probably know, some of the major partners in the Western Balkans are, in terms of economy, are actually Slovenia's partners. And also, obviously, any instability there would harm Slovenia's interest and its own stability. As far as the EU is concerned, I think that it really depends what one thinks about what one considers an influence. But the way I see it is that there should be some influence in terms of at all levels of decision-making process. And Tanja Fajon, for example, current Minister of Foreign Affairs, used to be an MEP. She used to be considered as a person that had, that was listened to when it came to the Western Balkans. And our current Prime Minister, Golob, he seems to be ascending up the ranks of the EU leaders very quickly for his energy interests, of course. But at the same time, if you have that kind of an influence, you might actually be listened to in the other areas. We'll see how this plays out.
I want to bring in here the quote from the Slovenian President Borut Pahor, who has called on the EU, as we mentioned, to grant Bosnia candidate status by the end of the year. And he says this would prevent Russia's growing influence and protect peace in the region. What have we learned about the security situation in the Western Balkans since Russia attacked Ukraine? How fragile is peace in Bosnia and Kosovo?
Well, for one, I do agree with President Pahor. I actually have been vocal about the importance of giving the candidacy status to Bosnia and Herzegovina since literally forever. But of course, the situation in Ukraine, the Russians' aggression in Ukraine, complicates things a lot because it sends a very terrible message to the world. It's not just the Western Balkan region; it's the world in general. Namely, it shows that any kind of violent change of borders, and especially in terms of and according to the ethnic principle, is basically giving a message to the region and again to the other regions of the world that this is possible. And if this is done by a permanent member of the United Nations that has essentially co-founded the current world that we live in today, makes the whole thing even worse. So, in one word, I think that the fragility of the Western Balkans as is becoming even more problematic given the behavior of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. It's just absolutely unacceptable against the UN Charter. And again, it's a very, very dangerous thing for the entire world.
I want to go back to Brussels. Can we expect that Brussels delivers the candidate status to Bosnia and treats Bosnia in the same way as it did with Georgia and Ukraine?
I think this is a very good question. I certainly believe and expect this to happen. I mean, we discussed earlier on, right, about some sort of conditions for Bosnia and Herzegovina to gain that status. I agree with that. I mean, it's fine. But we also have to understand that Bosnia, whatever happens, is a dysfunctional state in many ways. But giving the candidacy status to Ukraine and Moldova, but not to Bosnia and Herzegovina, that certainly baffles me. I mean, we talk about a situation in which the European Union has literally decided to consider the situation in which we are today as abnormal. So, because in normal circumstances, neither Moldova nor Ukraine would have received the candidate status so quickly. So this is one thing. And the other thing is that if the message is that, we should give the candidacy status to Moldova and Ukraine, to support these two countries, to try to protect peace and stability. I mean, Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? I mean, you have it in the middle of Europe, and you consider this as a kind of a different kind of game, different kind of proposition. It is just unacceptable. So as I said, I mean, I understand the Slovenian position. I understand the European position, that there should be conditionality. I'm just a little bit more radical because of the big picture. And the big picture is, if you want to send a message of peace, if you want to send a message to, try to have some sort of stability, and you leave Bosnia and Herzegovina out of it, it's just short-sighted.
And just ahead of the elections in Bosnia that are taking place next week, in a couple of days, Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik met with Vladimir Putin in Moscow, and he still hasn't been sanctioned by the Brussels, but he was sanctioned by the UK and the US.
Precisely. I mean, and this is one of the things that I have always had a problem with the European Union. I mean, just understanding the situation, just understanding the big picture. It hasn't happened the first time. It happens again. And again, I just want to reiterate this. I already hear the argument, I don't know, the European Commission, that millions and millions of euros have been invested in Bosnia and Herzegovina and nothing came out of it. Sure, but again, we talk about a different kind of situation. European Union has accepted this different kind of situation. Hence, candidacy status for Ukraine and Moldova. Leaving out Bosnia and Herzegovina is just unacceptable.
Zlatko Sabic, thank you so much for your insight for us here on Across the Balkans. He is a professor of international relations at the University of Ljubljana. It's time to look at some other stories making headlines in the region. Serbia's foreign minister has tried to play down the importance of an agreement with Russia after the Balkan state, which is seeking EU membership, faced criticism for signing it. Nikola Selakovic signed the deal on Friday with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting in New York. The agreement, dubbed the Consultation Plan, is meant to define relations between the two foreign ministries for 2023 and 2024. Selakovic said at a news conference on Sunday that the agreement is technical and relates to bilateral ties, not security issues. Meanwhile, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić also spoke to the media while in New York for the UN General Assembly. He warned the conflict in Ukraine could expand globally and that in a month or two, the world could enter a conflict of a magnitude not seen since World War II. And Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik met Russian President Vladimir Putin ahead of Bosnia's upcoming elections. Many are interpreting the meeting as the Russian leader's support for Dodik in his bid for re-election. The leaders have met several times since 2014, as Dodik wants to show the pro-Russian Serb electorate that he has Putin's backing. Montenegro's outgoing Prime Minister Dritan Abazovic says he is being ousted by the political influence of organized crime after he took on drug and cigarette smugglers. He was defeated in a vote of no confidence in August. Abazovic has only been prime minister since April, but was deputy prime minister for more than a year before that, following the 2020 elections that broke the three-decade hold on power by the Democratic Party of Socialists, led by the president Milo Dukanovic. In August 2021, while Abazovic's government was in power, a joint operation between Europol and Western intelligence agencies seized 1.4 tons of cocaine hidden in a shipment of bananas, the biggest ever drug bust in the Balkans. So far, no new governing coalition has emerged, and Abazovic remains the caretaker prime minister. Well, to get more on the political crisis Montenegro is facing, let's speak to Daliborka Uljarević. She is a political analyst and an executive director of the Center for Civic Education. Great to have you with us, Daliborka. Now, explain to us the current political situation. It's quite difficult to understand what's going on at the moment. Is it likely that we will soon have a new coalition, or is the country heading towards another election?
We are indeed having rather complex both political and economic situation, which is lasting for a while. But now we are entering into the danger to also have a serious constitutional crisis, as there is a certain overlapping in the further actions that could be undertaken by different actors in the parliament and in the government when it comes to the respect to the constitution. We are expecting the vote in the parliament both on the seize of this mandate of the parliament, but also about whether the president of the country will be dismissed, which is rather disputable from the constitutional point of view. In overall, I believe that the only way that this crisis can be solved is through the early parliamentary elections, as all of the different coalitions that are formed so far or announced are not providing insurances that they can actually get out from this.
And if we get some kind of coalition at the end, what kind of parliament can we expect Montenegro to have?
If we get the coalition now, as it is announced, unfortunately, we can get the majority in the parliament, which can be more pro-Russian oriented and under direct control of the Serbian president Aleksandar Vučić. After the elections, I believe that the situation could be a bit different, and that there is a chance that the parliament will be composed from the forces that are more resistant towards these influences.
Daliborka, what is the role of the president, Milo Dukanovic, at the moment, and can he be dismissed?
He has so far used to the most of the extent his constitutional possibilities by not proposing the new prime minister, and this is of course already having a effect of dissatisfaction to those who had certain proposals. But he cannot be dismissed in a constitutional manner, because only Constitutional Court can actually acknowledge that he can actually identify that he has violated the Constitution, and based on that decision, the Parliament could vote. As we do not have the Constitutional Court in function currently, the Parliament cannot vote on his dismissal.
And would having new elections work in favor of Milo Dukanovic and his party? And who would benefit from the new elections if we get to that point in Montenegro?
It's very difficult to try to predict that situation, because for quite some time we have more or less equalized the big blocks. When I am saying the big blocks, I'm talking about the one which is around Jukanovic and the one which is around those coalitions that have actually won his party in 2020. So these elections will be very uncertain, and most probably there will be a rather high census.
And what kind of impact did the war in Ukraine have on Montenegro? And what is the main reason behind the political crisis we are seeing in the country?
For quite some time, a lot of our politicians did not understand the consequences of this war, neither a political nor economical one. Now this is much more understood, but also it is clear that both Russia and Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić are pressuring much more their political actors in Montenegro to take over the power, or to work as much as they can to destabilize the country.
Right. And what is, just briefly at the end, what is Abazovic's future? He says organized crime used its influence to oust him over the raids, over the drug raids. What is behind his comments?
I don't see his long-lasting political future. I think he had a very unique chance with leading this government, which he didn't use because he actually, not because he fight against organized crime. And I think that this story about fighting organized crime is having a lot of the promotional aspects, as we are still not having any final verdicts, but some of the things have started by the prosecution. And the major thing what he did, which he will be remembered at this point, is that he has signed the so-called fundamental agreement with the Serbian Orthodox Church, which has heavily divided the country, and this document is criticized by many relevant actors as not being in line with the constitutional and legal framework in Montenegro, but also strongly dividing even the Orthodox body, those who are aligning to Serbian Orthodox Church and those who are aligning to Montenegrin Orthodox Church, plus that he was pushing for all of the political goals of the Serbian President Vučić.
Daliborka, thanks so much for explaining this to us. Seems to me that Montenegro remains divided. Historically, it's been divided between pro-Russian and pro-Western parties, and now it's been divided on other issues as well. We'll keep an eye on the situation in your country, and thank you so much. Great to have you on Across the Balkans. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching Across the Balkans. See you next time. Bye-bye.